Welcome to the debate. Imagine a chief executive who just lost, say, $50 million on a highly publicized, disastrous product launch,
Oof. Yeah, that is a rough day at the office.
right? But modern corporate culture, it tends to treat that kind of event as just a completely neutral data point. It's framed as an unavoidable cost of doing business. You hear, fail fast, learn faster, all the time.
Right, the whole Silicon Valley mantra.
Exactly. But what if a massive failure acts more like an X-ray? What if it doesn't just show the broken bone of a flawed market strategy, but actually reveals the baseline density of a leader's character?
And I think that clinical approach to failure is exactly what makes the text we're examining today so jarring, because it refuses to let failure be a neutral event.
Yeah, it really does.
By explicitly injecting theological and moral weight into the concept of losing, the text forces us to look past the balance sheet. We have to look directly at the condition of the decision maker.
And it does so immediately, right? The source material outlines a framework around 7 kinds of people who always fail, but it juxtaposes that really ominous title with a profound opening premise.
The bit about hidden secrets.
Yes, every failure should be examined for hidden secrets. The text argues that failure acts as the seed for humility, and that this specific humility births a willingness to listen to others. Ultimately, it allows a leader to leap from the ashes of ruin to what it calls uncommon success.
So we're really looking at a core tension here.
Exactly. The central question we're unpacking for senior leadership development today is this. Is failure truly a developmental seed that actively cultivates humility in leaders? I'll be arguing that it is.
Okay.
I take the position that failure is a necessary, almost mechanical theological tool. It's designed to shatter flawed leadership mindsets and, well, force humility.
And I will represent the opposing view here. When you look closely at the severe consequences detailed in this text, it portrays these specific failures not as stepping stones, but as destructive barriers.
You see them as permanent?
I do. My position is that these failures permanently disqualify leaders who lack a pre-existing baseline of reference. For a certain type of leader, failure does not plant a seed. It is a terminal setback.
Well, let's lay out our foundational arguments then. My reading really hinges on that opening directive to look for hidden secrets.
That framing inherently proves failure is designed as an educator, not an executioner. The text actually gives us 7 types of failure.
Quite the list, too.
It is. We have the unpersuaded, the undecided, the unfocused, the unteachable, the unthankful, the non-reacher, and the disrespectful. But I view these not as permanent diagnoses, but as starting conditions.
Starting conditions?
Yeah, they describe an executive's ego at its most vulnerable, flawed state. Experiencing the bitter sting of failure in any of these categories is the exact mechanism that strips the ego away.
So the failure is the medicine?
Precisely. Without that pain, a leader operates purely on hubris, totally convinced of their own invincibility. Therefore, falling into these traps is a prerequisite crucible. It breaks their artificial confidence, which is the only conceivable way a leader can transition to the uncommon success the author promises.
Well, I come at it from a different way, because we have to confront the explicit, unignorable title of the text. It literally says 7 kinds of people who always fail.
Right, the title is heavy.
The operative word there is always. It doesn't say, people who fail until they learn a tough lesson. It paints a picture of permanent ruin.
But doesn't the context imply growth?
I don't think the biblical examples support that. They demonstrate that failure cements destruction rather than sparking growth. Take the unteachable, for instance. The text quotes Proverbs chapter 13, verse 18, stating that poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction.
Okay, poverty and shame are the consequences.
Right, but the mechanism here is vital. They experience poverty and shame because their refusal of instruction is a permanent character flaw. The poverty doesn't suddenly teach them a lesson they were previously unwilling to hear.
So you're saying the setback is final?
For modern leaders, a setback caused by these 7 barriers is terminal if the leader is inherently what the text calls stiff-necked. If the soil of a leader's heart is already hard, dropping a seed of failure onto it doesn't grow a tree of uncommon success. It just exposes a barren landscape.
I have to admit, I struggle with how absolute the author's phrasing is there. Always fail feels incredibly fatalistic for a text that's ultimately supposed to guide leaders towards success.
It does seem contradictory at first glance.
But I think I reconcile it when we look at the internal psychology of decision-making. If we zoom in on the unpersuaded and the unteachable, we can see how this process of stripping the ego actually functions.
Walk me through how you see that functioning, because to me, an unteachable executive in an echo chamber doesn't suddenly wake up enlightened just because their stock price drops. They usually double down.
Well, they double down until they literally cannot anymore. Think of a senior leader like a forged blade. The intense, prolonged heat of being proven wrong is the fire required to temper them.
Okay, I'm following.
Look at the text example for the unpersuaded. It references Numbers chapter 13, the story of the Israelites at the edge of the Promised Land. 10 spies look at the landscape, see giants, which in our context would be massive market competitors, and they completely freeze.
Right, they panic.
Exactly. They say, "We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." Only Caleb tries to persuade them otherwise. Because they are unpersuaded by the vision, they fail to enter the land. They're forced to wander in the wilderness.
A wandering that kills off that entire generation, mind you.
But that is the metaphorical fire. The wilderness experience is the prolonged heat that forces a transition in reliance. The text immediately juxtaposes this failure with Romans chapter 4, describing Abraham.
Ah, the passage about faith.
Yes, it says, "Abraham staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith." Abraham wasn't born with that perfect executive vision. His faith was forged over time.
So the wilderness forces the adaptation.
Exactly. The unpersuaded leader has to feel the immense, exhausting pain of wandering in a corporate or strategic wilderness. That pain is the mechanism. It eventually breaks their reliance on their own limited sight and forces them to lean on deeper conviction.
See, the text itself undermines the idea that the forged blade survives this fire. Let's look at the actual mechanism of ruin for the unteachable.
Go ahead.
The text cites Acts chapter 7, verse 51. "Ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you do always resist the Holy Ghost." There is that word always again.
It is a strong, recurring theme, I'll give you that.
These leaders do not learn from the heat of the wilderness. Their decision-making is paralyzed because, as the citation from Jeremiah points out, they have a revolting and a rebellious heart.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Even a revolting heart can be broken by consequence.
But does the consequence cure the rebellion? In a corporate setting, this is the founder who surrounds themselves with yes-men, completely ignores user data, and drives the startup into bankruptcy.
And you think they learn nothing from that?
When the capital runs out, they don't say, I have found the hidden secret of my hubris. I should have listened to my engineers. No, they blame the board, they blame the macroeconomic climate.
They blame the consumer.
Exactly. They blame the consumer for not understanding their genius. Failure for the unteachable is not an educator. It is an execution of consequences. The text explicitly says their sins have withholden good things from you.
Right.
It doesn't say their sins have delayed good things until they finally get the point.
Okay, that might be true if we only look at internal stubbornness. But let's shift from internal belief to how leaders actually execute strategy out in the world.
Where are you heading with this?
The text addresses the paralysis of action brilliantly through the undecided and the unfocused. This is where the mechanism of failure forcing a pivot becomes undeniable in my eyes.
You're referring to the James chapter 1 citation.
Yes, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Instability is operationally agonizing. An undecided leader creates absolute chaos in their organization.
Oh, absolutely. They try to execute 3 contradictory strategies at once.
Exactly. But the text provides the remedy right alongside the diagnosis. It quotes Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. "I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing, therefore choose life."
So hitting rock bottom forces the choice.
Hitting rock bottom through operational instability is the exact mechanism that forces an executive to finally make a choice. They run out of runway, so they have to lock their heart.
Just like the Psalm citation.
Yes, Psalm 112, for the unfocused, his heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. And Philippians 3, forgetting those things which are behind, I press toward the mark. You cannot know how desperately you need to focus until you have paid the visceral price of distraction. The failure strips away the excess options.
I think you are reading an optimism into the author's scriptural selections that the text simply does not support. Let's look at the non-reacher.
Okay.
This category destroys the idea that failure always leaves you with another chance to execute. The non-reacher represents a complete, fatal failure of initiative.
A failure to ask for what you need.
Exactly. And the text cites Matthew chapter 23. Jesus laments, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not."
It's a very poignant verse.
It is. But this is not a story of a leader hitting rock bottom and then bouncing back to choose life. This is a story of a permanent expired option. Ye would not. The action was presented, the shelter was offered, and they passively refused it.
So you see it as a closed door?
Entirely. In leadership, failing to take initiative, as the text quotes James chapter 4, "Ye have not because ye ask not," means the door closes permanently. You didn't ask for the capital when the market was hot, and now the macroeconomic window is shut. It is a permanent forfeiture.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you are treating the biblical narrative as though the story ends the absolute moment the failure occurs.
Doesn't it?
No! Jesus' lament over Jerusalem is deeply tragic, yes, but it highlights the exact hidden secret the text's introduction promises us.
How is a closed door a hidden secret?
Because the secret is the realization that the gathering, the success, the shelter, it was always available to them. They just lack the humility to accept it on terms other than their own. Recognizing that tragedy is precisely what plants the seed of humility for the next generation of leaders or for that same leader in their next venture. The pain of the missed opportunity burns away the passivity.
I'm not so sure about that transfer of wisdom.
Furthermore, if we look at the ultimate authority in these scenarios, the role of divine intervention, we see a clear pattern of rescue and grace, not just terminal resistance.
Rescue? For people who always fail?
Yes. Look at the text's use of Deuteronomy chapter 1 for the unpersuaded. It says, "The Lord thy God bear thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that you went." God carries the failing leader.
But what about the ones who don't learn?
Even when dealing with the unthankful, divine grace is actively present. The text references Luke chapter 17, the story of the 10 cleansed lepers. 9 failed to be thankful. They operated out of pure executive entitlement.
Right, only one returned.
Exactly. One stranger returned to give glory to God, but the divine intervention there was healing all 10 of them, despite knowing 9 would fail the test of gratitude. God's grace creates a contained space for the failure to occur so that the baseline humility can eventually be realized and modeled.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are completely ignoring the seventh and final barrier, the disrespectful.
Ah, yes, the disrespectful.
This is where your theory of developmental grace hits a solid, unyielding brick wall. When we talk about divine intervention in the context of the disrespectful leader, it is violent and it is finalizing.
It is definitely the harshest language in the text, no doubt.
Because the mechanism changes entirely. The text quotes 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. God resisteth the proud. It does not say God teaches the proud or God carries the proud like a son.
Right, he resisteth them.
It is active, divine opposition. And look at the extreme examples the author selects. It quotes Proverbs 30, verse 17, where the eye that mocks his father, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it.
Wow, yeah.
And it quotes Deuteronomy 17, where the man who acts presumptuously and will not hearken to the priest, even that man shall die.
Those are ancient, highly specific judicial contexts, though.
But the author chose them for a modern leadership text. And most terrifyingly, the text uses 2 Kings chapter 2, where youths mock the prophet Elisha, and 2 she-bears come out of the woods and tear 42 of them apart.
Wait, really? She-bears?
Yes, literal she-bears. Let's be brutally analytical here. There is no post-mortem after you are torn apart by a bear. There is no extraction of a hidden secret after a raven picks out your eye.
That is a very fair point.
Divine intervention here does not mitigate the failure of the disrespectful leader. It finalizes their destruction. In a modern leadership context, this translates to a CEO whose fundamental disrespect for authority or the market or the law results in an SEC indictment or absolute loss of reputation.
Total collapse.
Exactly. It doesn't lead to a humbling learning experience. It leads to catastrophic, irreversible ruin.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. The imagery is incredibly severe. I grant you that. And translating bears and ravens to corporate strategy is, well, it's intense.
Very intense.
But we have to synthesize that severity with the author's opening promise. Why would the author write a guide to finding the missing ingredient in your present success equation if the equation was designed to be permanently broken?
So how do you interpret the she-bears?
We have to view the she-bears and the ravens metaphorically in a modern context. They represent the catastrophic collapse of a leader's empire when they operate with profound disrespect. Yes, the specific enterprise might be torn apart. The ego is certainly picked clean.
Okay.
But if the individual survives the professional ruin, the visceral memory of that catastrophe is the ultimate seed of humility.
Assuming they don't just blame the bears for being unreasonable.
Fair point. But the overarching premise of the text remains intact. While the consequences of being unfocused, unthankful, or unteachable are undeniably severe, examining these failures is the only way to uncover the hidden secrets of your own limitations.
By breaking the ego?
Exactly. It breaks the leader's ego. It forces them to realize they cannot rely on their own strength, which actively plants the seed of humility required for uncommon success. Without the failure, the ego remains completely intact, and true sustainable leadership is impossible.
Well, I would summarize my position by returning to the concept of baseline character. The text outlines 7 kinds of people who always fail. It does not outline 7 temporary phases of a successful leader's journey.
You see it as diagnostic.
Highly diagnostic. Without a pre-existing foundation of reverence and humility, falling into the traps of the unpersuaded, the unteachable, or the disrespectful leads only to divine resistance. If a leader lacks a fundamental willingness to be corrected, the mechanism of failure simply hardens them further.
It makes the stiff neck stiffer.
Exactly. It paralyzes the undecided, it blinds the unfocused, and it ultimately destroys the disrespectful. The failure is not the tool that builds humility. Rather, the failure is the tragic, inevitable result of its absence. We cannot romanticize failure as a universal teacher when the text so clearly warns that for some it is a final judgment.
I think where we fundamentally converge today is on the absolute necessity of the destination, even if we deeply disagree on the vehicle.
I would agree with that.
We both acknowledge, alongside the text, that humility is the absolute prerequisite for sustainable leadership. An executive who cannot listen, who cannot respect authority, and who cannot maintain focus will not survive the market or the wilderness.
Precisely. Whether humility is the preventative measure that keeps you from failing in the first place, or the desperate cure administered after the failure has already occurred, it is the only trait that allows a leader to engage with reality accurately. A stiff neck is a fatal vulnerability in any era.
Which brings us back to that broken X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning. The diagnostic waters of leadership failure are murky because they are reflecting more than just our strategies. They are reflecting our underlying character.
Well said.
So we leave you, the listener, to weigh this out in your own leadership journey. Is the setback you are facing right now the reliable tool forging your humility? Or is it a warning of a tragic flaw that needs immediate, profound correction?
Lots to think about.
There are certainly deeper layers to explore in these biblical texts and their application to modern strategy. Keep examining the evidence, keep questioning your assumptions, and we will see you next time.